Welcome to MAP, the bi-weekly market access podcast hosted by me, Dr. Stefan Walzer. I am the innovator of Market Access 4.0 and a health economist by training and working in the fields of market access, reimbursement, pricing, and health economics since 2004. Discover Market Access 4.0 and unveil the future with our innovative solutions. Max Insights, our fast and easy AI-based reimbursement planning platform. Dobo, our new revolutionizing way of creating reimbursement dossiers across the globe with the first and only dossier writing AI bot. Cubo, our new AI-based objection handling platform. And Waffle, train with Waffle's virtual reality genius in an immersive environment and with an AI-based counterpart. We are Market Access 4.0, so check out our website, marketaccess4-0.com. And now let's dive into the current discussions, processes, and trends in market access across the globe. Welcome to another episode of the Market Access podcast. Today, I think with a really interesting kind of topic. We're speaking not only about AI or VR, virtual reality or artificial intelligence, but we're speaking about extended reality, which is maybe even a bit what most listeners have not heard yet so far. But I have an expert for that on board for today. Welcome to the show, Günther Illert. And Günther, whoever doesn't know you yet, you can just quickly introduce yourself.
Thank you, Stefan. Pleasure to be here. Well, we know each other from the network of the healthcare shapers. Very quickly to me, I have a business background, had my first years in the consumer goods industry, and then have been in strategy and transformation consulting for more than 30 years. And about 14 years ago, I started working as an independent consultant. And actually what I do is I facilitate strategy dialogues in organizations. Typically healthcare organizations, pharma, biotech, medtech companies, but also facilitating conferences. And you just mentioned me being an expert in extended reality. Wow, I don't really know. What I love to do is getting the experts to talk. And I have been involved in topics around virtual and augmented reality for quite some time. And hence, I think I know a little bit, but I wouldn't consider myself the expert. I'm kind of an observer, maybe.
Yeah, maybe that's even better if somebody would just want to start in that area. I mean, if you have observed a lot of different kind of things and ideas, maybe even adaptation. So maybe directly jumping to the topic. I mean, what are the current achievements, maybe as of now, what you have, of course, seen in terms of extended reality, maybe as well around virtual reality or anything beyond in healthcare?
Well, maybe let's very quickly just define the term, what we are talking. I think everyone knows what are these virtual reality, these head-mounted displays are, like Taucherbrillen, diving goggles. They look like that, and the beauty of that is that you are immediately taken into an immersive world. You forget what's around you, and you are just in this computer-generated world. And that has been around for many years. It comes from, I think originally was developed for the military, but it's been used a lot in gaming, and it made its way into healthcare quite a few years ago. Think about therapies, pain therapy, for example. And this immersive world takes you into a different scenario. You are diverted. And for example, it's being used in procedures that are painful. And you kind of get an distraction from your pain. So less pain medication is used. There are companies who are focusing on that with their application. But it's also being used, for example, treating children when they have a painful application, like getting an injection or tearing off a plaster. Kids are taken away into a playful environment, and they often don't even feel the needle peeking into their skin. So that's the virtual reality. And then there is the other thing that only came a few years later, the augmented reality, where you blend the surrounding that you see, and you display virtual elements in that. Pokemon Go. I don't know whether your kids played Pokemon Go, but that was one of the examples when it became very known. But for example, when surgeons do an operation with augmented reality, some elements like MRT pictures can be blended into what they see, or some diagnosis results can be blended into what they see. And that's where AR, augmented reality, comes in. And and then the term extended reality basically stretches everything of that. If we talk about healthcare, I would say it's just at the very beginning that these technologies come into play.
Which is interesting, because I fully agree with you. I think there are a lot of benefits, which I think, at least in theory, I would say, those systems could also bring to healthcare. You just said, maybe VR, so virtual reality, is not the newest, let's say, technology overall. I think the first one, I don't know when they were, launched, 2017 or 18, I think, at least, maybe even a bit longer ago. But still, in healthcare, I know that there are some examples. You also just pointed those out, especially in kids, but also in some few other areas. So what are maybe kind of limitations, though? What is the key reason from your perspective that maybe healthcare has not yet adapted those new technologies as of now?
You know from your work how conservative the healthcare industry is. So change doesn't come fast. Everything needs to be evidence-driven. And it's not like in other industries where new ideas find a market. So everything about reimbursement is complicated. Medical products are complicated. But in principle, I would say the one thing that enables the diffusion of this technology is that the technology itself gets more accessible. The head-mounted displays are easier, they get cheaper, so technology advances are important. They enable things. But then there are not many people yet, not many opinion leaders, trainers, educated, who are both the good medics as well as the technology nerds. In a way, you need a little bit of this nerdship. You need to be convinced about the technology if you really want to apply it. And for example, I organized a conference at the University of Medicine in Mainz in end of August, and we brought together players both from the industry as well as the technology solutions providers to create that immersive experience. You really have to experience this to see the benefit. And there is a guy like Ivica Grgic. He is at the University of Medicine in Marburg, and he leads the XR lab in Marburg. He's a nephrologist, and he says, if you take an organ and you have the 3D experience of the organ, you can very differently understand how a heart, for example, functions if you can see it from different angles, rather than seeing a two-dimensional textbook. And you need people who are applying the technology in their care setting or medical setting or training setting to get convinced. That's the absolute necessary things. And then come all the other hurdles, like who pays for the technology, and can we embed it into the daily operation, and all the other things. So many hurdles before it gets applied because it's more than just another paper-based training, for example.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it probably because of what you have just said towards the end, right? Just another paper-based education. That's maybe also one of the key reasons, right? I mean, let's compare it, right? Or maybe just follow the kind of, let's say, potential change process, right?
Let me give you an example about that paper-based. There is this startup, I would still call it Living Brain. They come from Heidelberg. And Julian Specht, who is a co-founder of Living Brain, he developed an app, a virtual reality app for the training of rehabilitation of patients who have had brain problems. He was one of those patients itself, and he was, that must have been about 10 years ago or so, faced with a situation where the doctors told him, well, you need a brain operation. He said, wow, brain operation, that's probably not something that is easy. Can you make sure that I will basically, and I over-exaggerate now, that I will survive it? And if I wake up, what can I do to get to get trained again? And they say, well, there is training, paper-based training. You fill in check boxes, and you will be trained. And then he said, and a co-student of him said, well, that can't be true. That this is paper-based, and they developed the app where basically for training in your physical environment, you learn things like filling your coffee machine, operating your coffee machine. So very basic daily training procedures in virtual reality rather than in real life. And this app has been developed. It's in use now. It's reimbursed by at least some private health insurances, but it's a long way. So it is this, the conviction of someone who sees the benefit in the app, but then taking it into a realization can take years.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, maybe this is also a bit of a trap, right? Because ultimately you need that kind of, as you call it, I like that word, nerdship in a way, that you need to be behind it. But I guess most of those applications need, especially, let's say, some kind of one-off financing before it might even get, let's say, funded, reimbursed, whatever kind of stuff you could get from, let's say, from the system, right? I mean, great example with those kind of brain issues. I mean, if you would just be thinking how easy it would be to really train then really your brain instead of taking those papers and then maybe even, I don't know how those paper kind of, let the exercise look like, but it's probably more just do this, do that, or what would you do in case of, which is of course
like a labyrinth that you have to figure out in paper.
Yeah, exactly. But that's totally different in comparison to what you have just said. I mean, if you get your goggles on and you learn basically, I don't know how to use again your coffee machine or whatever, you can click on it. I mean, you need to do things, right?
Exactly.
So it's simulating real life. And that's, of course, let's say, changing all of your connections within the brain. But let's say, again, if you would just follow the normal, let's say, healthcare systems mindset or the kind of, let's say, processes, the key thing is they're rather having so-called hard endpoints, right? So what is ultimately what you learn out there, or what is the benefit of it? I think with the pain example at the very early beginning, you could maybe just say, I know 2 groups, one has more and one has less pain. You can do that with questionnaires whatsoever. Maybe a bit easier. Still not that easy, but it's easier. I mean, this kind of setting, it's maybe even more complex. The same thing with what you have as well said a bit earlier, right? I mean, if you have a physician who has then suddenly a more dimensional heart or brain or whatever to learn and maybe simulate as well the surgery on it. I mean, this is basically as well where it's getting difficult to measure the benefit, quantify it, right?
And the question is always, what are we talking about? Here we are talking about medicinal products that you just explained. And when it comes to a lot of those technology providers, they are often startups who have no connection to healthcare systems. So a tip for them would be, if you develop an application, don't go for a medical product first. Go for example, a training application. Let me give you the example of a company from Munich. It's called Stell dir vor, which basically means assume. They develop trainings for care, for nursing, you immerse yourself. I had these goggles on, and I'm not a medic. I had these goggles on, and I saw a virtual patient lying on a bed. And Teda Okenga, the CEO of the company, told me, "Well, go to that drawer, take a thermometer, and measure the temperature." So I did as I was told. It was on a conference, a booth in a fair, and I knew it was virtual. And so I measured the temperature, and then she said, check the blood pressure. And suddenly this virtual patient jumped up, and I was so shocked about this reaction because I didn't expect it. This immersive experience was really, really great. And this kind of training is not a medical medicinal product. It's just a training environment. And virtual reality can be used in training settings like this. Or there's this company, Nozera. They do trainings for surgeons. And it's not only that there is one surgeon who can train it, and obviously it's clear it is better that you train that you simulate before it cut into real flesh. So and these kind of trainings can be done as team-based trainings. Mm-hmm. You can repeat, you can simulate, you can look with more people, like a full operations team can look at the operation, and they can train, they can simulate the operation and agree, for example, what's the best way to cut out a tumor or so. And that is still it's not a medicinal product. It doesn't need approval. It's not about getting reimbursed. It's just the training and the education where it's being used, and you get much faster to an ROI than thinking all the way through how to get the product approved, how to get it reimbursed. So there are ways to leverage the technology before it gets too complicated, I would say.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's a very important point. Of course, let's say from a business perspective, but I mean, even if I would be thinking about the, let's say, healthcare systems perspective, and knowing exactly what you just said a bit earlier, that most of the decision funding, financing, reimbursement are rather, maybe call it conservative. Which is maybe also their job, right? But ultimately, if you maybe start a bit outside there, which is still, let's say, touching somehow the healthcare system, as you had just laid out the really great examples, which is more going to trainings, you might also develop your advocates, your KOLs in a way as well for the future, which maybe make the steps for the companies which are followed after the current ones, maybe at least a bit easier. Is that as well a bit of a hope when I would be thinking about a healthcare system in the future?
Absolutely. Last year, I was organizing a conference. We called it Metaverse Meets Health. That was at the university in Hagen. And we had a professor from the clinic in Bethel. He's doing child surgery. And he uses a VR app to help kids to help kids and parents during the preparation of the procedure. So the kids get the VR goggles on and they watch a movie, and at the same time he is talking to the parents, explaining what is happening. So he said it only takes 10 minutes, what before took half an hour, because we always had to take care of the kid. So that's an example of a very, I would say, simple, basic application of using VR. He also uses to divert kids when it gets painful, and he has done studies around that. But there is a person who is convinced, who sees how he can apply the technology in his daily routine. So we had this conference, and then there were the questions from the audience. If this works in this clinic in Bethel, why shouldn't others, other clinics use it? They just don't know. So I think one element is to, first of all, make it transparent and also to demonstrate how it can be used. And there is no Abrechnungsziffer, no code for reimbursement. That only comes at a later stage. It's the conviction that it makes sense to use this. And I think that is the starting point. And that needs to be the starting point. So start slow, find more allies who see the need. At the University of Medicine in Mainz, there is a visceral surgeon. So he does liver operations. And he is also one of the very early adopters of 3D printing. What does he do? He prints a liver. He visualizes where is the tumor in the liver. He uses this printed liver to explain to the patient, say, hey, this is your case. And the same is being done with other tumors. So it's the patient education. So it's using visualization to demonstrate this is what will happen to you or what we are doing with you. And then this is being also used for the simulation, for the operations planning. And it's, in principle, it is just a tool. It's a good tool when it makes sense. But as with all tools, you need to get used to using the tools.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, otherwise it's getting really tricky. I mean, we've spoken now about, let's say, companies, or at least the kind of, maybe call it a recommendation for especially startups companies to maybe look for examples also, at least outside of healthcare, which I think makes sense. We have also spoken about, let's say, early adopters, which I think is the normal process as well when innovation is being launched, right? Have you seen also kind of, let's say, early institutional adopters, meaning either departments or, I don't know, full clinics? You mentioned before private health insurances in Germany, the PKVs. Would you consider those as early adopters of those kind of new innovations? Could they maybe as well lead the way?
I wouldn't be able to say there are these kind of organizations or that kind of organization. At the Charité, for example, I mean, they are the biggest European hospital, and they do a lot of very innovative stuff. Their heart team is using VR to simulate operations. And I was talking to one of the younger guys, and he said, how do you go across that the technology is being adopted? And he says, well, some of our senior doctors who do that for 30 years, they don't need that simulation because they know it already, and they probably wouldn't use it. And at the Charité, there is one professor, one function, who basically tries to bridge between the medical side as well as the side of the startups. And if you think from the perspective of a startup, what does a startup want? A startup is often driven by their technological idea. They are very often product featured, but they don't know the care process. So they come with their idea. Hey, I have a great idea. Everyone will love this idea, wouldn't they? Maybe. But it is so important that you not only have the driver from the technology, but that you also have the recipient, the sponsor in the care process. And then you need to have both sides, and that's always my recommendation to the startups. You need to speak the language of those who will use your product, and you need to understand what is meant. It's not another situation where you need to make a pitch that you can do in front of investors, but not in front of the user. Here you need to speak the terms, you need to understand where the problems lie. And often it is things like you have the goggles need to be disinfected, they need to be clean. How do you get that into the hygienic environment in a hospital? That might be a problem. I had another case where the problem was there were not enough plugs to charge the device. So the plugs to charge the device, they were in the corridors. And in the corridors, the hospital beds, they were running where the plugs were. So it's often very practical problems. I mean, there are bigger problems also, like budget and getting into the systems, sharing data protection. Many big problems, but it starts small, and that's why it's so important to co-create the solution with both, with all the users.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, because I mean, ultimately, especially let's say in an environment where the processes, let's say the financing process, are not yet, let's say, given, it is also, I would say, even more important that the little kind of things are done in the way that the users can simply as well support you within the system. Because I mean, if they don't support you, it's even more difficult, right, to get them on the list on, I don't know, coding or reimbursement or whatever.
And it is not only the initial investment of finding the funding, for example, for the glasses or the initial programming of the virtual environment, but it's the ongoing procedure. You constantly need to onboard new people that come on board. You need to update the system, and that is also something that often gets forgotten. So you have some nice pilot projects, but the turn then into daily operations, it's often missing.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And we're moving already a bit towards the end of the recording. So, I mean, we have talked a lot about, let's say, startups, new ideas, applications, etc. I mean, what I would also be interested in hearing from you, because as you said, you hear a lot, you speak a lot, you observe even more. I mean, what are the key, and you said already some of those, what are the key recommendations for startups, especially those new technologies? And linked to that maybe as well, how do you see the healthcare system maybe in 5 years' time? So maybe by 2030, any kind of adaptations, adoptions, what you currently see, or maybe even hopes would you maybe have?
I had a discussion with heart surgeon, cardiologist, and he was asked, what are the main technologies driving your field forward and the moderator asked, let's say the next 5 years. And then he said, well, if you had said in the next 10 years, I would have said it's gene and cell therapy. If you ask for 5 years specifically, then it's visualization, 3D visualization. So there is a need to drive that forward. In order to drive it forward, the startups need the sponsor in the clinic, and the sponsor in the clinic needs to have a technology partner. Both need to work hand in hand. You need to show the use case as it is applied. And then it can move forward. I will not give any estimation how much or not much VR is being used. I always thought in the 30 years that the system transformation in healthcare would be much faster than it is. I think it will take generations, but XR technology, extended reality technology, can be used as a tool, and there are fields where it absolutely makes sense to use this technology. And there are companies on the market who are good in that. I think one element that also will play a role is we need more and more training. And if we look at the burden that healthcare professionals are faced with, it is less time available. And here, virtual reality, augmented reality are ways to provide easier access to real life simulation. And that will help. Think about training of someone in an emergency department. Everything is loud. There are alarms blinking. So you can use this immersive experience of simulating an emergency room, and people will know, is this an environment where I want to work or not? So there are ways to use the technology to bridge the way into realization. And I think this is where we will see more applications. Or as I mentioned, the training of surgeons, the simulation, educating patients, telling kids what to expect when they go into an MRT. All these things are, I would say, little things that can be done, but there will be more of that.
Yeah, no, perfect. I think, Günther, I think the time is unfortunately already over. We have the target of roughly 30 minutes, but it was really great fun listening to you, also to the different kind of applications. I mean, I hope for the future. I hope it's getting faster, but let's just see how it happens and what happens. Thanks a lot for your time and your insights, Günther.
It's great spreading the word. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Another energetic, I would clearly say, podcast recording, this time with Günther Illert. He didn't say that he was an expert, but ultimately, quite clearly, you felt how he was into the extended reality with all of the different kind of applications, especially which are now being forced by different startups in the German environment in this way. I think the examples were, for me at least, quite clear. VR, AI, extended, augmented reality, I think, is at least the future. But of course, the key thing is also how to implement those into the system. I think quite clearly is also that KOLs, advocacy, maybe the kind of nerds, as we probably agreed to, and this is meant really in a positive way, need to as well leave the way. It is a change process, and a change process in a healthcare system might even take a bit longer. I think from a commercial perspective, when thinking about a startup in that area, maybe it's worthwhile to at least also have a key component outside of healthcare. Günther was bringing up the example with training in order to also have some kind of commercial success before this might then as well lead into the healthcare system. Healthcare system is, of course, a way where things might take a bit longer. Funding, financing, reimbursement is different. It's sometimes difficult. It's also sometimes difficult depending a bit which kind of product and environment you also have to prove, for example, quantitatively the added benefit, especially in a, let's say, reimbursement system. So this as well be taken into consideration. Ultimately, how we could see the future in that area is maybe visualization might be maybe the first next step in that area in the next 3 to 5 years. Everything beyond that, of course, Günther brought up the examples out of the heart area where, let's say, we're going back to drugs with the ATMPs, cell and gene therapies. But I would also guess that then also virtual reality, augmented reality might be hopefully more reality in our healthcare. That was an episode of MAP, the Market Access podcast provided by Mars Market Access and Pricing Strategy, which is your healthcare consultancy in the German-speaking markets. MAP is available every second week with a new episode, so watch out. And in case you might have questions, contact me directly and or visit our website on www.marketaccess-pricingstrategy.de.